everyone, Jim Branscombe here for the Cinematic Void vlog. I'm back again with another top 10 list, and today I'm going to be talking about my top 10 zombie films. And honestly, I had a hard time with this list. I had a whole list that I had written out a couple weeks ago, and I just kind of stared at it and I was like, it just didn't feel right. So I actually went back, changed them out. I considered doing maybe a top 15 instead, or at least a list of honorable mentions. And I was like, you know what? That defeats the spirit of the top 10 list. So it's not best zombie movie, because I'm sure when some of you see some of these on the list, it's like, what is wrong with you? That's not a great zombie movie. But for me, this is just a list of movies that I really love. And again, it's not that serious. You can do your own top 10 list. In fact, I want to know what your top 10 list is after I get done mine. So yeah, without further ado, we're gonna jump into my top 10 zombie film list. I do want to mention that it is one film per filmmaker, and this comes into play quite a bit because there are two directors I would consider the zombie guys. One is George A. Romero and the other is Lucio Fulci, and I only could pick one from them, so kind of made it more challenging, because honestly, if I didn't have this rule that I arbitrarily created, there would be multiple Fulci and Romero films on this list. But hey, I only get one, so let's see where Fulci and Romero land. And without further ado, let's just jump into the list. Coming in at number 10 on my top 10 zombie film list is a movie that I'm pretty sure I'm the only human being that would actually put this on a top 10 zombie film list, but it's a movie I really enjoy for a lot of the right reasons and probably for a lot of the wrong reasons. I am talking about Zombie 4 After Death from 1989, directed by Claudio Fragasso, who's probably best known as the director of Troll 2, but he's done all kinds of fun, insane movies. He was a protege of Bruno Mattei, so that should tell you just how insane this is. It features a great top tier theme song by Al Festa called Living After Death. It's such a rocker of a jam. I'm a sucker for a song that's written specifically for a movie, especially when it's like some power metal ballad, whatever you want to call it, that just kind of sets the tone for the movie. For those who haven't seen it, is it a sequel to any of the zombie movies? Well, it's not like any of the zombie movies are technically sequels. It's just, in Italy, the zombie franchise was just like, hey, made a movie. Why don't we call it Zombie 3 or Zombie 4 or Zombie 5? Like, maybe there's an honest sequel from Fulci's Zombie, aka Zombie 2, Zombie Flesh Eaters, to Zombie 3, which Fulci started directing and then quit because of ill health, where Bruno Mattei and Claudio Fragasso ended up finishing. So this kind of picks up in the insanity and gonzo-ness of Zombie 3. It takes place in the Philippines, or maybe it doesn't take place in the Philippines, it was shot in the Philippines, and you get a variety of zombies. You get fast zombies, you get slow zombies, you get ninja zombies. Again, I'm pretty sure I'm the only lunatic that would even consider putting this on a top 10 zombie film list, so here we go, Zombie 4 After Death. For my number 9 spot on my top 10 zombie film list is another movie that I don't think there's another human being outside of me who's, probably insane, that would put this film on it. I'm sure at some point in your life you wondered, hey, Bill Heinzman, the lead ghoul from George A. Romero's Night of the Living Dead, what if he got offered some money to reprise his role of lead ghoul, but this time he also got to write and direct the script? Well, that answer is 1989's Flesh Eater, aka Revenge of the Living Dead, aka Zombie Nosh, if you happen to see this in the UK. And yeah, pretty much Heinzman's lead ghoul comes back around Halloween, attacks some people that are on a hayride, creates more zombies. There's definitely some questionable scenes, if you know what I mean, where Bill the director seems to be doing a favor for Bill the actor. We're not going to get into that, but it's a great trashy zombie movie. The gore's pretty good. Bill wasn't the only vet from the original Night of the Living Dead that shows up in this movie. Vince Trevisky, who's the sharpshooter that's in the posse that kills Ben in Night of the Living Dead, comes back and plays a sharpshooter in a posse once again. And if you're kind of wondering, how did this movie even happen? Well, Night of the Living Dead ended up in the public domain, and Bill Heinzman and some producers decided to take advantage of it. And let me tell you, John A. Russo wasn't pleased, George A. Romero wasn't pleased, Richard P. Rubenstein wasn't pleased, but hey, couldn't really stop it. So yeah, this is your alternative universe sequel to Night of the Living Dead, and there's gonna be another movie on here that's kind of similar in its alternative version of the Night of the Living Dead saga, but in a completely different way and a little more authorized, I guess. For number 8 on my top 10 zombie film list comes a movie that might be a little controversial to include because the director doesn't consider it a zombie movie, but you know, they look like zombies, they rip people apart, they drink blood, eat flesh, so you know, close enough. I'm talking about 1980's Nightmare City, directed by the great Umberto Lenzi. This movie was also released as City of the Walking Dead, which is one of the most ironic titles ever, since not a single one of these zombies walks. Everyone fucking runs. They have machine guns, they have weapons. This movie's just nutso. Just right from the gate, it just goes for it and doesn't stop. It stars Hugo Stiglitz, the great legendary Mexican actor, Laura Trotter, Mel Ferreira. It also has a Hall of Fame dummy drop. It's basically tied with the one in Dr. Butcher MD, which is another great zombie movie that just missed the list, but you know, I went with this one because it's just more insane. I've actually screened this movie twice now, once pre-Cinematic Void, and then again during one of the summer Camp Void series, I guess back in 2021, 22, I think. I can't remember exactly, but the movie always kills with the crowd. It is great fun. If you see someone playing it in a theater, definitely go see it. You will not be disappointed.
Mother, this cloth smells of death.
And speaking of the other film in that pre-Cinematic Void double feature that I put together, of course, coming in number 7 is Burial Ground, aka The Nights of Terror. Again, what could you say? I've actually, you know, outside of that screen, I screened it 2 more times for Cinematic Void. I showed it year 1 during Camp Void, where I had the musician Umberto come play a set beforehand, and then I snuck it in as the closing film for the 7 Deadly Sins marathon for the 7 years of Cinematic Void anniversary. For those you haven't seen, it's full of pottery zombies. It's at a villa, there's lots of sex, there's lots of J&B, there's lots of insane gore, there's zombies using lawn tools, and of course, you can't forget, or maybe you try to forget, but the legendary actor Peter Bark as Michael. One of the greatest performances in cinema, period. The weird mommy complex that pays off at the end of the movie when one of the most notorious zombie bites ever caught on camera. I mean, what else could you say? Well, you can go to Letterboxd, you're either gonna see 5-star reviews or 1-star reviews. That was pretty much what happened at that Void marathon screening when I closed it. Like, people were either all in or all out, but you know me, I'm all in. I love Burial Ground. Also, shout out to Deanna Rooney, who I've unfortunately subjected to playing Michael in several skits on the CINEMADNESS movie, as well as live in person.
Welcome to Potter's Bluff.
What's going on? Give me the more.
For number 6 on my top 10 zombie film list, I'm getting a little classy here, a little bit different, a little bit of a slow burn. And I'm talking about 1981's Dead and Buried, directed by Gary Sherman, who also directed Vice Squad as well as Deathline. For those you haven't seen, basically there's this sleepy kind of New England seaside town called Potter's Bluff where people come and visit and then they get murdered and then they mysteriously come back alive as a town person. Like, this is one of the great slow burn creepy horror movies. It's horror by the water, the whole New England nightmares vibe that goes with it. It also features actor Jack Albertson in one of his last roles. If you don't know who Jack Albertson is, he was Charlie's grandfather in the Gene Wilder version of Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory. He's the one who's like, oh, I can get out of bed and go to the Chocolate Factory when I could be working the whole time and supporting my family instead of just laying in bed. But whatever. But he plays a mortician. He's got a really, really great performance that, you know, once the twist hits, it's like, oh shit, never saw that coming. I haven't screened this one yet, but it's definitely been on my list, and one of these days I'm gonna definitely do Dead and Buried. It's highly, highly recommended. Great, unique version of a zombie film. Great, you know, Stan Winston special effects. Featured a screenplay written by Ronald Shusett and Dan O'Bannon, who worked on Alien, although Dan O'Bannon claims he had nothing to do with the screenplay, they just put its name on it. But hey, Dead and Buried's a great movie regardless.
Great.
And speaking of Dan O'Bannon, how's that for a transition? Coming in at the number 5 spot is 1985's The Return of the Living Dead, written and directed by Dan O'Bannon, based on the book Return of the Living Dead by John A. Russo, who was the co-writer of Night of the Living Dead with George A. Romero. Now, if you read the book, it's more closely tied to an authentic sequel to Night of the Living Dead. Dan O'Bannon decided, like, we're not going to do that. Made all the zombies pretty much indestructible. He also added the thing where they would only want to eat brains and not flesh, and these fuckers run. This is one of the best horror comedies ever made, killer punk rock soundtrack. If you want to hear me talk more about Return of the Living Dead, check out the In the Mouth of CINEMADNESS episode I did on it, where I talk about how I discovered the film, as well as the various times I screened the film over the years in Cinematic Void. Now, if you remember from the beginning of the video, I mentioned that I had some difficulty coming up with this list and kept changing things in and out, and you know, you'll notice, and I mean, spoiler, there's no Reanimator or Peter Jackson's Brain Dead, aka Dead Alive on here, and I just kind of felt like if I'm gonna do one horror comedy, I'll do the one that I revisit the most. And it's not to say either of those movies are bad, you know, they're, you know, probably really top 10, or at least in the top 15, top 20 or whatever, but I just kind of felt like if I'm just gonna do one horror comedy, it's going to be Return of the Living Dead, because it's the GOAT. At the number 4 spot is a movie that was very transformative to me growing up and getting into cult cinema. It is Michele Soavi's Della Morte Dell'Amore, aka Cemetery Man. I did a whole episode of this on In the Mouth of CINEMADNESS, as well as a podcast episode on the Cinematic Void podcast if you want to hear me talk in detail about it. But this is one of the great kind of movies about life, death, you know, bureaucracy, dead-end jobs, trying to find yourself in life, love, you know, maybe did I already say love? Whatever. This movie is phenomenal. It is probably the last great Italian horror movie. And if you haven't had the opportunity yet, make sure you go catch a screening of this in theater of Seven Films' brand new restoration, or pick up that 4K Blu-ray set. For number 3 on my top 10 zombie film list is a movie with multiple titles. I'm talking about 1974's The Living Dead at Manchester Morgue, aka Let Sleeping Corpses Lie, aka Breakfast at the Manchester Morgue, and aka Don't Open the Window. I mean, yeah, you don't want to open a window during a zombie invasion. It's directed by Jorge Grau. It is a really great, interesting movie. Stars Christina Glaubo, Ray Lovelock, Arthur Kennedy. It is another great kind of slow burn zombie movie. Has a great soundtrack, great gore. I mean, what else could you want from a zombie film? So yeah, this is my number 3 pick. Coming in at number 2 is a film by a filmmaker that is one of the 2 filmmakers that's the most synonymous with zombie films. I'm talking about 1981's The Beyond, directed by Lucio Fulci. I mean, what can I say? This is a masterpiece. It has one of the all-time great horror soundtrack scores by Fabio Frizzi. It is a weird mix of zombie, occultism, just surrealism. It is just a wild, wild movie. It was originally released in the United States as 7 Doors of Death in a very bastardized version, and you know, it didn't include that Fabio Frizzi score, but that's not a problem anymore because Grindhouse Releasing has done a beautiful restoration. There's 35mm prints and there's a brand new 4K that they just put out, so yeah, Beyond is one of the all-time greats. I already realized we're doing a list, but I figured, you know, why not? Why don't I just throw in my rankings, or my personal rankings for Fulci's Zombie Quintet. Number 1's The Beyond. Number 2 is House by the Cemetery. I love this movie. You know, I did a filming location video at the house from the House by the Cemetery if you want to go check that out. I just think it's really good, really underrated. And I know people always want to talk about Bob as an annoying kid, but you know, no Bob haters here. Just go away, Bob haters. Number 3 is Zombie, which I wasn't always the biggest fan of. Not that I didn't think it was groundbreaking or the gore was good. I just thought it was a little too slow, but I've kind of like appreciated more as I've aged. And then coming in 4th, even though there's really no loser because all these movies are great, City of the Living Dead, aka Gates of Hell. I know it does some of the same things that The Beyond does with the surrealism and the gore and those kind of things. So yeah, that's my Fulci ranking in the middle of my top 10 zombie list. And for number 1 on my top 10 zombie film list, of course, gotta go with a George A. Romero film. I went with 1978's Dawn of the Dead. This film's a masterpiece, has those great special effects by Tom Savini. And if you want to hear me talk more about Dawn of the Dead, again, there's an In the Mouth of CINEMADNESS episode I do on that. I also talk about when I went to Monroeville Mall in the early 2000s and show some of the pictures from then. So if you haven't seen that, check it out. But yeah, this is my top 10 zombie film list. Tell me what your list is and what you think of my list. I know some of you will be like, well, we're just gonna throw your list in the garbage because you put Flesh Eater and Zombie 4 on there, but you know, that's part of the fun of it. We all can have different opinions. No one is right, it's just fun. So yeah, just let me know in the comments or hit me up on social media and, you know, tell me what your favorite zombie films are. Until next time, see you in the void.